Dr. Martin Luther King, visionary, moral prophet, fighter for justice, was only 26 years old when he began his leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. He had no idea when he went to Montgomery what would develop, and that he would be thrust into events that would catapult him into worldwide prominence, and that danger would become his constant companion. When one examines his life, it seems undeniable that he was destined to meet his moment, and that providence was his guide. Many of us, and I was myself not aware of this, but when Dr. King was born Michael King, Jr. His father was Reverend Michael King, Sr. And at 5 years of age, Daddy King, Reverend Michael King, Sr., took the both of them, he and his young son, Jr., down to the county courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, and changed both their names to Martin Luther King, Sr. and Martin Luther King, Jr., respectively. Somehow you wonder, how could that have happened? But it did. Dr. King graduated at 15 years of age from high school and had to have a special dispensation to go to Morehouse College at 15. Graduated at 19. Then he went to Crozier for his master's in theology, then to Boston University for his doctorate. It was while he was working toward finishing his theses that he received a call from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery to the pastorate. He had other options, but he chose Dexter Avenue. He thought it would be a calm pastorate, where he could finish his thesis, because he was headed towards some administrative career. And of course, we know that the rest is history. If he had not graduated at 15, high school, 19 at college, finished Crozier, and then looking for a place to finish his studies, finish his doctoral thesis, he wouldn't have been in Montgomery, Alabama at 25 years old, and wouldn't have been selected to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association, and therefore the struggle that began. He also received his thesis at the very same time that he was elected. And this excerpt of one of Dr. King's speeches tells about his entrance into the civil rights movement. And this is what he said. One day, after finishing school, I was called to a little church down in Montgomery, Alabama. And I started preaching there. Things were going well in that church. It was a marvelous experience. But one day, a year later, a lady by the name of Rosa Parks decided that she wasn't going to take it any longer. She stayed in her bus seat. You may not remember it because it's way back now, several years, but it was the beginning of a movement where 50,000 black men and women refused absolutely to ride the city buses, and we walked together for 381 days. That's what we got to learn in the North. Negroes have to learn to stick together. We stuck together. We sent out the call. No Negro rode the buses. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life. The people of Montgomery asked me to serve as the spokesman. And as the president of the new organization, the Montgomery Improvement Association, that came into being to lead the boycott, I couldn't say no. Then we started our struggle together. Things were going well for the first few days, but then about 10 or 15 days later, after the white people in Montgomery knew we meant business, they started doing some nasty things. They started making nasty telephone calls, and it came to the point that one day, some days, more than 40 telephone calls would come in threatening my life, the life of my family, the life of my children. I took it for a while in a strong manner, but I never will forget one night, very late, it was around midnight, and you could have some strange experiences at midnight. I had been out meeting with the steering committee all that night, and I came home. My wife was in the bed, and I immediately crawled into bed to get some rest, to get up early the next morning, and to try to keep things going, and immediately the telephone started ringing, and I picked it up. On the other end was an ugly voice. That voice said to me in substance, "Nigger, we are tired of you and your mess now. And if you aren't out of this town in 3 days, we're going to blow your brains out and blow up your house." I had heard these things before, but for some reason that night it got to me. I turned over and I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. I was frustrated, bewildered. And then I got up and went back to the kitchen and started warming some coffee, thinking that coffee would give me a little relief. And then I started thinking of many things. I pulled back on the theology and the philosophy that I had just studied in the universities, trying to give philosophical and theological reasons for the existence and the reality of sin and evil, but the answer didn't quite come there. I sat there and thought about a beautiful little daughter who had just been born about a month earlier. We have 4 children now, but we only had one then. She was the darling of my life. I'd come in night after night and see that little gentle smile. And I sat there at that table and thought about that little girl, thought about the fact that she could be taken away from me any minute. I started thinking about a dedicated, devoted, and loyal wife who was over there asleep. She could be taken from me. I could be taken from her. And I got to the point that I couldn't take it any longer. I was weak. Something said to me, "You can't call on Daddy now. He's up in Atlanta, 175 miles away. You can't even call on Mama now. You got to call on that something in that person that your daddy used to tell you about, that power that can make a way out of no way." And I discovered then that religion had to become real to me, and I had to know God for myself. And I bowed down over that cup of coffee. I never will forget it. And oh, yes, I prayed a prayer. And I prayed out and out loud that night. I said, "Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right. I think I'm right. I think the cause that we represent is right. But Lord, I must confess I'm weak now. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage." It seems at that moment I could hear an inner voice saying to me, "Martin Luther, stand up for justice. Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world." I tell you, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roar. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, still to fight on. He promised never to leave me alone. No, never alone. No, never alone. He promised never to leave me alone. Sometimes I feel discouraged. And I don't mind telling you this afternoon that sometimes I feel discouraged. I felt discouraged in Chicago. As we move through Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, I feel discouraged. Living every day under the threat of death, I feel discouraged sometimes, living every day under extensive criticisms, even from Negroes. I feel discouraged sometimes. Yes, sometimes I feel discouraged and feel my works in vain. But then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. God bless you. Thank you.